So for the second story that I have for Legislative Week in Review, so this just came out on the 10th, and it's that Representatives Ayanna Pressley and Rashida Tlaib announced the Breathe Act, calling for defunding police, reparations, and universal basic income. This is a piece of legislation that has been drafted by the Movement for Black Lives. And the Breathe Act comes in response to the ongoing protests demanding justice for George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and other Black men and women killed by police. Ayanna Pressley and Rashida Tlaib, they like signed on to it as supporting it, and that they will introduce it, but they haven't introduced it yet. So what you can find online about it is what has been drafted by the Movement for Black Lives, not the actual legislation. But under the bill, the Movement for Black Lives, a coalition of more than 150 organizations, is calling for sweeping reforms, including the elimination of government agencies like the Drug Enforcement Administration and the use of surveillance technology. The bill is broken into 4 sections that focus on reforming federal institutions and policies. The bill would also end life sentences, abolish all mandatory minimum sentencing laws, and that's a Biden one for you, and close all federal prisons and immigration detention centers. So it says the first calls for divesting from police agencies like the DEA and ICE, banning surveillance technology, ending civil asset forfeiture, ending life sentences and mandatory minimum sentences, closing federal prisons, and decriminalizing and retroactively expunging both state and federal drug offenses, among others. The second section calls for incentives for states to shrink or close detention facilities, removing police from schools, abolishing police gang databases, eliminating court fees and forgiving all court debts, repealing all juvenile offenses, and creating new intervention programs that would send specialists other than police to respond to 911 calls, among others. So that kind of ties into what they're doing in Boston, right? The third section calls for social equity in communities, including equitable funding for all schools, closing youth detention centers, developing school curricula critical of colonialism, more wraparound services for students, promoting environmental justice, providing safe access to water, creating pilot programs for universal basic income, providing access to education for undocumented immigrants, and modernizing all schools, among others. So that part gets a little social justice-y. So that is a problem with that part. And the fourth section calls for reparations for those incarcerated, including enfranchisement to vote, creating a public financing program for campaigns powered by small dollar contributions, incentivizing states to increase voter turnout, allowing undocumented immigrants to vote in local and state elections, and holding officials and police officers accountable, among others. So it's pretty intensive.
Wait,
obviously.
what did it say after that on the bottom?
Sorry,
it said, what was the last thing? It said, although the bill won support, no members of Congress have said they plan to introduce it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say,
so that's why these two are the only ones who actually want to introduce it. But and again, because they're Democrats, what's it really going to do? Where's it really going to go? If Nancy Pelosi isn't backing it, what does it really matter?
No, is this really more about, their reelection and getting, I don't know. It seems to me there's so much in there. There's something for everybody to love and something for everybody to hate,
Yeah.
It's never going to get anywhere.
This is a coalescence of a lot of different bills that are out there, and it's just like putting them all into one. But I don't know, the way that it kind of comes off is almost like a manifesto, and I will.
It's an interesting document to basically say, to document what those two people are for at this point. It's very interesting to talk about, but I can't imagine that would go anywhere. It's not about action. It's a statement.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and like I said, that's why it comes off more to me as like a manifesto from the Movement for Black Lives. of what they would like to see. I don't think necessarily that it's a negative that they have come out with this. I think that this is a
No.
comprehensive, act that they're giving their demands,
Yeah,
and
it's actually, like I say, it's a very interesting, it's a great communication document.
right. Right. I mean, and you have to come to the table, to the negotiation table with something, right? And I feel like this is something that they have actually that they've obviously this is well thought out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's very
Now,
detailed.
Now, would this be interpreted by, other congressmen of they could write a piece of actual legislation intending for it to get passed that essentially is like one of these bullet points,
Right.
right? I mean, that actually could happen, that they could basically, by communicating this, they could actually have something happen by basically just doing that, the defunding ICE and DEA, et cetera. There's a whole bunch of bullet points there that could be individual piece of legislation that actually could go somewhere.
But it's got to pass in the Senate and the House, so like.
First of all, it's got to be introduced.
It's got to be
introduced in the
right,
House.
but I mean,
and passed in the House.
even one of those bullet points, like how are you going to get it through? So you got 2 votes so far, right, out of 435, right? So I mean, you still got a long ways to go to get that to pass, and it is some of that stuff is really kind of radical in the sense of it's affecting the roots of the problem. It's dealing with it's not just cosmetic; it's real change. So the chances of that getting majority support at this point, but things may change after the election. But I think that's as it is, obviously it's a whole lot of stuff. It's like a program rather than just
But there are a couple of things here, like I'm looking at removing police armed security metal detectors and other surveillance equipment from schools and government offices that provide social services. I mean, that's something that you maybe could get folks around, or banning pretextual stops and consent searches.
Why would you want to ban metal detectors? Because I'm just saying, like,
they're saying in certain contexts, right? They're saying in schools and government offices that provide social services. So they're obviously going after a particular thing where, folks are going for some kind of aid, but they're threatened by all the surveillance.
And it also it ties into the psychological part of it, right? Where they're going to school to be taught an education, but they're treated like they're going into a prison, or they're treated like prisoners. And we already know what that can do to your psyche if you're treated a certain way. And I feel like that's just obviously certain communities, they are very crime ridden, and you do need certain policing tactics and stuff like that. So I don't think that just a broad swath of just like banning everything wouldn't be okay. But I think that the increase of having all these police officers in schools and having those metal detectors, I think that also plays into the psyche of these kids, and it plays into the violence that goes on.
But the problem is you have guns everywhere, right? If you didn't have guns everywhere, it wouldn't be an issue. Like in Canada, you don't have metal detectors at schools, as far as I know, because you don't have the plethora of guns.
But you also don't have the mass incarceration that you do here in the United States.
Right, but I'm just talking about the number of guns, not incarceration. Just the fact that there's tons of guns around. That's So there's the issue of if you didn't have metal detectors and you have somebody walks in and shoots up the school, right? I mean, which has happened before. This is why they introduced the metal detectors, and which obviously have a detrimental effect.
But the metal detectors is not for that. The metal detectors is because, unfortunately, you do have a lot of schools that are in a lot of areas that are really crime ridden, and these kids, because there's a lot of gang violence, because there's a lot of other forms of crime.
Yeah.
Right, but it's not because some kid is going to shoot up the school. It's not about that. It's about the fact that you do have a lot of gang violence in a lot of these places. But again, these kids, it's like you're almost perpetuating it. You're making it come true, if you are treating these kids like they are criminals to begin with.
Right. Well, I'm with you on that. It's just, I think you could take like, you could pick 3 to 5 things out of that whole list of like, it seemed like there was like 100 things on that program.
Yeah.
And those would all be major legislative victories to get any of those.
Yeah, I'm going through it a lot. I mean, a lot of this really interesting ideas, safe passage to school programs, all sorts of great stuff.
That's why I think that something like this, something so comprehensive, like I said, you can tell it's very well thought out. It's something that they have worked on. They've obviously, it's a coalition of 150 different organizations. So it's not just, one organization coming out with this. It's a coalition of them, and their demands, and the fact that, again, you have to have something to come to the negotiating table with, right? And you want to shoot high. That's the thing.
Right.
Like, you want to shoot for the sky when you go into the negotiating table, and then you compromise, you work together, you compromise, and then you come out with something. I mean, we already have seen that just with Trump's administration, that they are malleable and that they are willing to work some sort of police justice reform in there.
Yeah, so this is actually interesting. I mean, there's been some speculation around the idea of Black Lives Matter forming its own political party. I mean, this is essentially a platform for such a party, and it's actually, as you say, a pretty well thought out. Where you might not get everything, but if you enact a number of these, you're actually transforming.
Yeah, it's not a bad platform to run on, right? If you want to be a candidate who runs on this,
just throw in the war machine and we'll be out. I'm sold. All right.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where I was on that candidate Noelle Farama, I believe, for Tulsi. She had everything I want, like UBI and environment and everything that was like very much similar to Tulsi's platform, but she didn't really specifically have the anti-war bullet point, but it's kind of implied to me from all the other stuff that, she's going to be obviously an anti-war force down the road if she were to get elected.
Did Tulsi endorse her?
I don't actually believe so. I don't actually.
I only ever know of like one person that Tulsi has endorsed in this season.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
No, I'm just thinking about trying to, the problem is like, it's like we're 2 different countries at least. I mean, it's like, if it was just a Northeast, the Eastern Seaboard and stuff, we'd be such a progressive country, right? Like the problem is you got like all those states, where they're just like, it's rural and they're conservative and they're not going to go for this stuff. And they have so much power.
But it's like you said, that if we keep it on a economic justice type of realm, then we have more things in common that we can actually get, working for us, right?
Yeah, I mean, and the personal freedom issue, so it's freedom and justice again, justice being the economic part and freedom being kind of the, the freedom part. So there is, the economic part is crucial.